here for a morning mug to speak with our candidates running for the 49th district in the House of Delegates for Virginia. And our candidates here today are Delegate Alfonso Lopez and Karishma Mehta. And so we'll be hearing from them today. If you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll give them 5 minutes each to give us a little introduction speech, and then we can move on to questions. So Delegate Lopez, if you would like to give us your statements first.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. I want to thank the Arlington Democrats for organizing this morning mug and Izzy Tavares for moderating. It's always an honor for me to appear before the Arlington Dems. I've been involved with the Virginia Democrats since high school, and the Arlington Democrats have been my family since the 1990s. You've been my mentors, role models, and friends. You even introduced me to my beautiful wife, Sarah. ACDC is special. We are more than just about winning elections. We're also a community based on putting our mutually shared values into action. Thank you for what you do and what you represent. Many of you met or worked with my lightning bolt of energy mom. She devoted her life as a teacher and guidance counselor in Arlington, helping immigrant kids continue their education after high school. Today, as a result of her efforts, over 1,000 kids who could have been forgotten are college graduates. I don't believe you know as much about my dad. He was raised in a small village in the Andes Mountains of Venezuela. My father came to this country at the age of 19, undocumented, with $270 in his pocket and the dream of a better life. He worked as a busboy and a waiter. He learned English. He graduated from Northern Virginia Community College when I was 5. Then, taking one class a semester, he graduated from George Mason 1 month before I graduated from high school. They each worked 2-3 jobs at a time to provide for us, but with the help of government programs, they got an education, bought a home, and achieved their dreams. They instilled in me the values of hard work and public service that drive me every day. As your delegate, I've been a champion for our values in Richmond, fighting to make Virginia a place where we lift everyone up and leave no one behind. I'm proud of the work I've done and the relationships I've developed to find common ground and get things accomplished. Over the last 10 years, I've been the patron, co-patron, or chief co-patron of over 150 bills signed into law, addressing everything from the environment and renewable energy to small businesses to criminal justice reform as it relates to driver's license suspensions, to expanding temporary assistance for needy families, to protecting immigrants and sensible gun violence prevention. I'm especially proud of my legislation that created in-state tuition for dreamers, brought back project labor agreements protecting workers, dedicated $800 million to help revitalize Chesapeake Bay, and my bill that created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund that served as the backstop for eviction prevention during the COVID-19 pandemic and provided housing for thousands of families, including right here in the 49th district. And as the House Majority Whip, working as a part of our senior House leadership team, I'm honored to have, among other things, increased teacher salaries by 5% starting in July, secured a dedicated source of revenue for Metro, worked to close the school to prison pipeline, ban the death penalty, legalize marijuana use for adults, created the first state voting rights act in the South, and perhaps most importantly, expanded Medicaid and healthcare protections to 500,000 Virginia families, including 45,000 people in our region. Going forward, we must focus on jobs and the economy, education, and the needs of working families. I pledge to continue fighting for better schools, transportation solutions, environmental safeguards, economic development, criminal justice reform, and our values of embracing diversity, tolerance, and compassion. My dad has a phrase he likes to say a lot. Tell me who stands beside you, and I'll tell you who you are. I'm humbled by the support and endorsements of those who are standing by my side in this re-election campaign, including Senator Tim Kaine, Senator Mark Warner, Congressman Don Beyer, Governor Ralph Northam, State Senator Adam Evan, Speaker Eileen Fillicorn, Emma Viola Sanchez, Katie Crystal, Takis Karantonis, David Priddy, Christina Diaz-Torres, J.D. Spain, Zakiya Worthy, and Walter Tejada. I'm also grateful for the endorsements of a wide range of organizations, from the Arlington Firefighters to the Sierra Club to a number of labor unions, including IBEW, Unite Here Local 23, AFSCME, LIUNA, and the Carpenters. I'm also proud to have 100% lifetime ratings from the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, the Virginia Education Association, and NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. They understand, as I do, that politics is about improving people's lives, as I hope I've shown you over the last 10 years. I will always work hard to make sure that Virginia is a place where we lift everyone up and leave no one behind. I look forward to the conversation this morning.
Thank you so much, Delegate Lopez. Karishma, if you would like to speak.
Absolutely. Good morning, all. Thank you so much to the Arlington Dems and our lovely moderators for being here this morning and for hosting this opportunity. My name is Karishma Mehta. I'm a preschool teacher running to represent the 49th District in the House of Delegates. This district includes historic and diverse neighborhoods from Seven Corners to Green Valley, Penrose, Aurora Highlands, and Arlington Mill, among many more, all that are struggling to survive during the COVID-19 pandemic. My story is the story of so many people who live here in the 49th and across Virginia. My parents came here from India seeking a better life. They struggled with rent, school lunch debt, and lack of health care, all without the protection of a union. After I graduated from college, I inherited those struggles. I worked long hours at jobs that paid starvation wages to help pay down the student debt that I still have as a renter on Columbia Pike. When I became a teacher, I skipped meals and avoided the doctor to fund my own classroom while watching my students struggle with the same problems that I grew up with myself. That's the reason I decided to run, to break that cycle of inequity for my students and their future. We need universal health care in Virginia. We need universal pre-K. Our kids deserve a healthy planet, which I will fight for by passing a Green New Deal for Virginia. The current systems we have were not built to uplift all of our people. We have a racist carceral system, an education system that doesn't humanize our queer, disabled, and neurodivergent students, and an economic system that allows the very rich to keep getting richer while the rest of us struggle paycheck to paycheck. In my district, as housing prices go up, corporate politicians insist the answer is to incentivize luxury developers. Our solution is fundamentally different. We're fighting to guarantee basic human rights rather than prioritize monopolies like Dominion and their lobbyists. As we fight for our rights, we inspire new people to get involved in the political process. My district, year in and year out, ranks in the bottom 10 for turnout in our governor and statewide races. We need to create a movement in the 49th that will expand our electorate and ensure that every time Democrats vote, we win. On our campaign, we're working to talk to those voters who have never been spoken to before, who have never even seen their delegate come to their door and have an honest conversation with them. I'm showing up in the community because this community has always shown up for me. Now that I'm running to be delegate, I'm asking everyone that I talk to get involved, vote for Democrats up and down the ballot. And so what is that going to take? It's going to take bringing young people, new people, and communities of color into the political process and keeping them there. We need people here to know that there's a reason to go out and vote, that there is someone fighting for them, not just on election day or during campaign season, but every day of the year. And as a preschool teacher, I work year round in the classroom. And as a delegate, my commitment is to work year round for this district, not just during legislative session. We need to elect more teachers. Our elected officials are often lobbyists, attorneys, or those well connected to power. And I believe that Arlington deserves a delegate connected to the people instead of the wealthy few. We have phone banks, canvases, and volunteer trainings every single week. So please get involved, stay involved, and bring a friend along as we transform Virginia into a place that works for all people, not just the wealthy few. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karishma. Thank you both. We will now be moving over to the question section. So I will alternate between who is answering questions first. And folks, if you guys have questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll be reading from them. And my first question will be for Karishma first, then Alfonso. So what do you believe is the most critical issue facing the 49th district, and what is your plan to address it?
I think the most critical issue facing the 49th district is clearly healthcare. We are in a pandemic that has devastated our small businesses, has devastated the renters along Columbia Pike, that has devastated the immigrant communities that live and call the 49th district home. And if we are not guaranteeing healthcare to all people, we are not working in the best interests of our constituents. And so my plan to ensure that all people are guaranteed healthcare is, of course, to support Medicare for all at the national level through a single payer system. But at the state level, we can work to cancel all medical debt. We can work to ensure that our public schools are rebuilt with preventative healthcare clinics on school grounds to ensure that our young people get the healthcare that they need before they run into issues. And we can also make sure that we are expanding mobile clinics and community health centers that help people who are disabled access healthcare from home, and also ensure that we're expanding those community health centers to make sure that our undocumented constituents and working class and low income neighbors have the healthcare that they need as well. And so my plan for ensuring healthcare to all is expanding that healthcare to ensuring that big pharma and health insurance companies do not have a say in the legislation that we pass at the state level, and to ensure that our national reps are fighting for Medicare for all so that we can move towards a single payer system and guarantee healthcare as a human right.
Thank you. And Delegate Alfonso Lopez, what do you believe is the most pressing issue in the 49th district?
Thank you for this question. It's not one issue, it's at least six. Affordable housing, COVID-19, addressing access and equity, education funding, small business support, and healthcare, as well as, I would say, transportation and transit. Affordable housing is, I mean, if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that our social safety net is fragile. If people are not, working, then their food unstable. If they are housing, there's housing instability. They had an eviction crisis in the early part of last year. And then on top of that, if kids aren't going to school, then sometimes they're not eating. So what we found is that when we work together at the state level and with the federal partners, we were actually able to do amazing things in terms of affordable housing. I'm very proud of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that I created in 2013. Over the last several years, we got it from $6 million in annual revenue over the course of the biennium to $125.7 million in the last budget. What I'm very proud of about this is it uses the backstop for eviction prevention and homelessness prevention and housing instability prevention during the pandemic. As a result of the rental and mortgage assistance program that we created with the governor over the summer, we were able to use the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as a way to support that and provide additional revenue if needed. On top of that, we work with the federal government as part of the CARES Act to get over $524 million for eviction prevention services. So what does that mean? That means that in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, we actually had fewer people evicted than we did in 2019. Let me repeat that. In 2020, in the middle of the worst pandemic in a century, we had fewer people evicted than in 2019. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund that I created was a major part of that effort. And then in terms of COVID-19, the fact is that Latinos, for instance, make up 9.4% of the Virginia population, but they account for 31% of all of the COVID-19 cases in Virginia. What was the issue there? The issue was there was a lack of outreach to new American, Latino, and immigrant communities. And what does that mean? In a district like the 49th district that has over 100 languages spoken in it, over 50 languages spoken at Wakefield High School, that's horrible. And so what I did was I worked with the governor's office and the administration to make sure that we had outreach in other languages, that we had specific outreach going through various networks in the 49th district and across Arlington and across Fairfax and across the Commonwealth, so that it wasn't a situation where people were being left behind. And as a part of that as well, I'm very proud of the legislation I passed this last year that basically said we will expand emergency Medicaid COVID-19 services for testing, treatments, and vaccinations for everyone, including folks who are undocumented and including people who had an inability to pay, because we had to clear up that loophole in the code. And what does that mean? That means the virus doesn't care if you're undocumented or not. We have to be reaching out to everybody. And I had to actually specifically pass legislation that overturned a bill that was passed in 2005 that basically said that we were not allowed to use any state money to help undocumented people. That was just the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, because as I said, the virus doesn't care if you're undocumented or not. If we're going to nip it in the bud, if we're going to address the pandemic effectively, we have to be reaching out and touching everyone. Education, it's so straightforward. We have to be able to, restructure how we fund education in Virginia specifically. There are haves and have-not communities. Arlington does incredibly well, but we're a Commonwealth. That means we're all in it together. We have to be focusing on making sure that we're funding schools in every corner of Virginia. And small business protection. If Columbia Pike has shown us anything, it's that small businesses are vital to our growth as a Commonwealth. And so they account for 2/3 of all jobs in the United States. We have to be supporting them, especially during the pandemic, in ways that maybe we're not right now. And then in terms of healthcare, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we were able to pass Medicaid expansion. And we're actually working now to increase that to 200% of the federal poverty level. We're also creating our own state exchange. And we're also addressing issues like copays. And so the fact is that there's a lot more we need to be doing in terms of healthcare. And then in terms of transportation and transit, outside of the pandemic season, we have an issue in Northern Virginia. When it takes 45 minutes to drive 4 miles into DC, that's a problem. So with the Long Bridge and what we were able to accomplish with that in the last budget and the last from the 2020 session, and what that will do to relieve traffic in the Northern Virginia area, but also with transit. We need to be focusing more money on transit. We're very proud of the fact that we got Metro funding, finally a dedicated source of revenue for Metro. But the fact is that there is so much more we could be doing in terms of transit. Patrick Hope and I had a Twitter dialogue a couple days ago about, wouldn't it be great if we actually had Metro along Columbia Pike corridor? Wouldn't that be great? There was a plan to do that many, many years ago. We'd love to actually reinvigorate that discussion.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. I will be moving on to the next question, which will be Delegate Alfonso Lopez first, and then Karishma Mehta. So this question is, constituent issues are a large part of the job in elected office. What is your plan to work with and help constituents that have not traditionally been involved in local government or may not know that there are constituent services available to them?
Well, one of the things I'm very proud of is that we have bilingual services, and then we actually do regular outreach to community, civic association groups, community groups, and as a part of that, what we've been able to do is, or actually, let me just talk about one thing that I'm really quite proud of, is that we do healthcare fairs, bilingual healthcare fairs every year, where we enroll folks in Obamacare. And we do it in several different languages, but most importantly, Spanish. And so what, as my opponent mentioned, that, this needs to be a year-round job. I can tell you without a doubt, being a member of the Virginia House of Delegates should be and is a year-round full-time job. I am going to events almost every day, and I could be going to several events every day. And we are actually aggressive in reaching out to folks and doing community events, doing town halls, having meetings with various interest groups. And then the big thing, though, is that because of that, we're helping constituents get Medicaid. We're helping constituents get unemployment benefits in the middle of the pandemic. We're doing the healthcare enrollment fairs. But also because of the work we do at the local level in constituent services, we do things like pass legislation addressing the Purple Lounge along Columbia Pike, and finally dealing with these bad actor establishments that need to have, that local communities need more resources to address. And also, I'm incredibly proud of the work I did with the community in negotiating between the developer and the Commonwealth of Virginia to keep the Department of Motor Vehicles office on 4 Mile Run instead of having it move 35 minutes away into Fairfax. We were on the cusp of having that happen several years ago. And because of my work with constituents, because of my regular outreach to constituents, we were able to rally our forces, make sure we had public meetings, make sure we had regular letters going to the commissioner of the DMV, as well as the developer, BM Smith. And you know what we did? We actually got a deal. We finally got past no, no, no. We kept the DMV on 4 Mile Run. We were able to actually expand the number of desks at 4 Mile Run and include more resources in courthouse and in Clarendon. And so that's all because we work with constituents. We do our job. Actually, I'm going to end with this. The most important part really of being a member of the House of Delegates is constituent services, being available, being constantly in the community, but also what our office does, and my chief of staff, Kevin Salcedo, what we do on a daily basis is help people with the state government, with their issues with state government, like Medicaid, like in unemployment benefits, which has been such a problem this year. And I'm incredibly proud of our work in that regard.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. And the same question for you, Karishma. So constituent issues are a large part of the job in elected office. What is your plan to work with and help constituents that have not traditionally been involved in local government or may not know these services are available to them?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, as a preschool teacher, I'm not typically on the 9-month teacher schedule as most teachers are. I actually work year round in the classroom. And what I believe is an important part of being a delegate is ensuring that you are working year round in a way that doesn't just help people during events or during organized facilitated, moments, but actually at the door. And as an organizer, as someone who has fought to protect tenants in the 49th district from predatory lending, from corrupt corporate landlords, I believe that the most effective way is to have a field office that is open year round with a team dedicated to reaching constituents at the door. And that is one way that we are constantly having conversations. Right now, we are reaching out to communities that usually don't participate in these kind of primaries, that typically sit out of the political process because they're never given a reason to vote and they don't know who to vote for, that they have a choice in the 49th district. And so talking to these constituents, one thing is very clear is that there might be legislation occurring during the first 30 days of the year, but the rest of the 330 days of the year, we have a major gap to fill. And I believe that filling that gap with meeting people at the doors, with increasing voter registration, voter turnout, and ensuring that these communities not only know what the services are, but we're expanding the services and giving people what they need through constituent case work throughout the year is really important. And so as an organizer, what we know is that when we come together, when we build a community and when we focus on collective care, that is when we see prosperity. That is when we see a relief for struggling working people. And what we need to be focusing on is direct relief rather than continuing to enact legislation that puts barriers in front of people and the services that they really need. And so I'm very happy and I'm very excited to be working towards that with our coalition partners, with young organizers within the district that are committed to doing that work year round and ensuring that we're focusing on mutual aid. We're ensuring that people have food on the table. We're guaranteeing rent relief in a direct way. And we're ensuring that people who need healthcare receive the healthcare that they need. And I'm very excited to be moving forward with that. So thank you.
Thank you. And so moving on to the next question, Karishma, you'll be answering first. Following the Black Lives Matter protests we saw last year and the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, there were a lot of key pieces of criminal justice legislation that were worked on both last session and this session. What do you see coming next?
So again, as an organizer, as someone who has participated in the Black Lives Matter organizing, one who sees the historic levels of racial injustice that we are seeing today, you know, these instances of police violence are not isolated. They are not the fault of one individual. It is the culmination of a system that was designed to oppress and target and kill Black and Brown people, low income working class people, and trap them in a system that doesn't guarantee them their freedom. And so, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we're talking not about reform anymore. We're talking about transforming our society so that punishment comes secondary to building compassionate systems, guaranteeing people their basic human rights of healthcare, housing, education, good paying union jobs, and ensuring that we live in a society where people can walk freely without the fear of ICE, without the fear of police and law enforcement. And we live in a district that is in desperate need of that kind of transformation. And so, what I am very heartened by as someone working, towards dismantling those systems is that this is not some fringe issue. This is an issue that touches the heart of so many young people, of so many Black and Brown working class people. And it's very heartening to see even Arlington Young Dems be focusing on things like prison reform, on understanding what it means to truly create a society where people can be free of police terror. And what I see and what I hope for the General Assembly is that we can work together to enact laws that make it easier for people to live freely, rather than increasing police budgets and not funding and investing in those resources that our communities really desperately need, which are, again, healthcare, housing, education, and good paying union jobs. So that is what I would like to see more investment in, that, and I would like to see less investment in those systems that were designed to oppress Black and Brown people.
Thank you, Karishma. And Delegate Lopez, same question for you. Oh, you're muted.
My 3-year-old who did not want to change his clothes in the background. So we're dealing with that with my father. So to answer that question, yes, we have actually been doing exactly that, passing legislation that has fundamentally changed the face of Virginia when it comes to criminal justice reform, racial equity, and address and sort of getting rid of Jim Crow era laws in the Commonwealth. And I'm very proud of the fact that as the majority whip for the House Democratic Caucus, I helped secure votes for the passage of all of these bills, including abolishing the death penalty in Virginia, legalizing marijuana for adults. In the 2020 special session, we created citizen review boards for police, jury sentencing reform, increasing prosecutorial discretion, expanded deferred dispositions, ending stops and searches based on marijuana odor, ending many pretextual reasons for stops, earned sentence credit expansion, and starting a Marcus alert framework so that instead of actually going into a mental health situation, you're actually with just police with guns, you're going in with professionals, counselors who are trained in dealing with these kinds of situations. Decertification of bad police officers, reform no-knock warrants, improved training for police. In the 2020 regular session, ex parte expert funding requests for criminal cases, requiring recording of custodial interrogations, reformed sentencing range in criminal trials. We improved processing for people who are unrestorably incompetent facing trial, and we expanded parole. I'm especially proud of my bill that empowered the Attorney General to actually investigate and prosecute the state police and the local police departments for civil rights violations, abuses of constitutional rights, and excessive force violations. And my bill that ended the modern day debtor's prison, where driver's licenses were suspended for the inability to pay court fines and fees. People can't pay fees if they can't go like drive and go to work. They can't pay their fees if they lose their driver's licenses. And that's not the case anymore. basically decriminalized poverty for over 600,000 Virginians. I worked on that bill for 3 years and we finally got it done. I also passed the de-ICE bill, worked on it for years to try to make sure that there was no longer a mandatory reporting to ICE if you were actually stopped for a busted taillight. Also, something that actually was a real problem in South Arlington, that if you were the victim or the witness of a crime and you were undocumented, or you knew of a family member or a friend who was undocumented, you didn't report crimes. And that was actually reported in the national press in South Arlington. So what does that mean? We actually passed a bill that I worked on for several years to try to basically say that you do not have to tell the police if you're reporting that you are the victim or witness of a crime, whether or not you're undocumented or not. All right, because what was happening was that people were actually preying on the undocumented population and immigrant populations in Arlington. So if that's happening in Arlington, it's definitely happening in every other corner of the Commonwealth. To answer the question about what we need to do next, we need to pass qualified immunity, finally. And also, my work on the study of school resource officers, we need to actually take that to the next level. And so I think we need to go further in terms of addressing why, or even if we do need school resource officers in schools. But long story short, we have truly taken a momentous step forward over the last 15 months in terms of fundamentally changing the Commonwealth of Virginia as it relates to criminal justice reform. And we have moved past the parts of the Virginia State Code that are remnants of the Jim Crow era.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. And now I will move into just slightly individual questions that I've seen addressed in the chat. And so we'll begin with Delegate Lopez. As the candidate endorsed by multiple organized labor groups in this race, can you expand on what happened with Right to Work this session and what's next for repealing it?
And sure, I'm happy to answer this question. The repeal of the Right to Work laws in the Commonwealth is an historic legislative goal that we have in the Democratic caucus. I mean, this is, speaking of Jim Crow, this is a racist Jim Crow era law that has been prominent in the House, in the South, and hurt unions for decades now. We've got to repeal it to strengthen worker rights, organized labor throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, and set an example for the rest of the South to follow suit. However, historic legislative goals are not achieved easily, and they have to be handled carefully and with attention to detail. Republicans and corporations such as Amazon are prepared to fight this to the death, and this means there's no room for error. The vote that was forced this past session came dangerously close to one of those errors. It was well known that Governor Northam had said he would veto the bill, and that the Appropriations Committee was prepared to let the bill die in committee as well due to budget issues brought on by the pandemic. If that had happened to the repeal of Right to Work, Republicans would have won, and it would have meant potentially years before we got to broach the topic of repealing Right to Work again. And who knows what our state government's going to look like by then. The vote was strictly procedural, and it would not have moved the legislation anywhere near final passage. And everybody knew that. It was simply an act of political theater. And you don't have to believe me. Just look at all the Northern Virginia organized labor groups, like the Arlington Firefighters and Paramedics, the Carpenters, LEUNA, Unite Here, Local 23, IBEW, and AFSCME, and more. They agree with me, and that's why they've endorsed me for re-election.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. And Ms. Karishma Mehta, a question for you. What specific legislation do you propose that is significantly different from Delegate Lopez's legislative objectives, and how do you plan to accomplish them?
Sure, but if I could just comment on, the repealing of Right to Work and what it means to actually stand with organized labor for a moment. What we have seen is that with a Democratic trifecta, with Democrats controlling both the state Senate, the House of Delegates, and the governor's mansion, we are still unable to pass a simple repeal of Right to Work that would guarantee workers the right to unionize their workplace. I mean, we are seeing historic worker momentum in states like Alabama, in other parts of the country, where workers are fed up of the starvation wages, of being unable to work safely with undignified working conditions, lack of hazard pay, you name it, during the COVID-19 pandemic. And if we're in the business of talking about Amazon, what we need to ensure is that we're electing politicians that don't make backroom deals with Amazon and monopolies, in Virginia. And we're ensuring that legislators prioritize guaranteeing that these corporations pay their taxes to the community, rather than incentivizing them with millions of dollars in subsidies. Like was done in 2019 with Amazon. And so there's a really clear distinction here in how certain politicians go about addressing big business and corporations, and who is actually on the side of working class people that are working for 15 bucks an hour or less. That is still not a living wage in our time. And we need to be focusing on not only repealing of right to work, but taking on those corporations head on that are destroying our small businesses and that are not guaranteeing their workers a dignified workplace. And so, there is a clear distinction here in how to approach repealing right to work, and the many other steps that we could be taking to empower organized labor in Virginia. So on that note, the pieces of legislation that I think are distinctive. And just to correct me if there's a second part to that question, but what we are talking about is a platform dedicated to empowering workers, whether that is raising the minimum wage immediately, whether that is removing police officers from schools without a doubt that SROs don't belong in our schools, that we would rather have mental health counselors and nurses and clinicians in our schools rather than police officers that continue to criminalize and push out our Black and Brown students. What we need to do is guarantee people the right to unionize. What we need to be doing is ensuring that we're working towards canceling all medical debt, which is a possibility at the state level, and expanding on tuition-free public college and trade programs that work alongside our high schools to ensure that young people have good paying jobs and are not saddled with student debt. And so there is so much that we could be doing. And I think the distinction here is that we are running a campaign that is completely people funded, that doesn't answer to landlords and luxury developers and large corporations. We are actually working to invest in our community year round. And ensuring that the only people, the only interest groups, the only special interests that we're focusing on are people living right here in the 49th district.
Thank you, Ms. Mehta. So moving on to the next question, it will be for both of you. I'll start with Karishma Mehta. What specific reforms do you propose to improve the delivery, quality, access, and accountability of healthcare in Virginia? Currently, we prioritize expensive medical interventions versus preventative care and rush patients through appointments without the ability to ask legitimate questions about their options. Will you open it up to naturopathic and alternative medicine?
So as someone whose parents were born and brought up in India, Ayurvedic medicine is a really important part of our daily life. I believe that the care that a patient receives should be between the doctor, the physician, and the patient. And so the type of medicine that the patient is receiving, the type of care that the patient is receiving should not interfere with the quality of care that they're receiving. And so absolutely, I support expanding naturopathic, Ayurvedic, Eastern medicine and medicine that's not necessarily qualified as Western into our healthcare system. One of the biggest barriers between patients and their doctors is the insurance industry. And so we need to be working towards a healthcare system in Virginia that doesn't incentivize insurance companies or big pharma, but actually guarantees people the basic right to have a conversation with their doctor, to ensure follow-ups without the fear of additional medical bills, and to guarantee that long-term care. As someone who has been underinsured and uninsured for a large portion of my life, I mean, I haven't been to a primary care doctor in almost 4 years now because I am underinsured and unable to afford that monthly or yearly expense. And so if we're talking about long-term care and we are talking about people having the right to see their doctor, to develop a relationship with them, to access the kind of care that they feel is most needed for themselves, then we need to be de-incentivizing big pharma, insurance companies, and actually passing legislation to remove those barriers and guarantee a universal single payer system for all Virginians and for all people.
Thank you so much. And Delegate Lopez, same question for you. What specific reforms do you propose to improve the delivery, quality, access, and accountability of healthcare in Virginia? And will you open it up to naturopathic and alternative medicine?
Thanks for that question, Izzy. I've said for years that healthcare should be a right, not a paid for privilege. Healthcare should be a right, not a paid for privilege. My baby boy, who's 3.5 now, was born 2 months early and was in the Georgetown NICU for 9 weeks. When we got the bill in October, it was $630,000. If we didn't have good insurance, we would have had to declare bankruptcy. That's why I voted to expand Medicaid to over 500,000 Virginians and over 45,000 adults in Arlington and Fairfax County and in our entire region. We've also lowered insurance premiums, capped the price of insulin, and passed protections to ensure that Virginians can't be denied healthcare coverage for pre-existing conditions such as diabetes and heart disease. We've also combated a myriad of COVID-19 related issues by dedicating millions in state funds to the purchase of PPE, broadened access to the vaccine, and ensured it's distributed equitably, provided paid sick leave for home healthcare workers, and increased access to telehealth services. While I'm incredibly proud of the progress we've made, there's still so much more we have to do. In the upcoming budget, we provided funding the past budget, we provided funding to conduct a study on providing Medicaid for all Virginians. And that has to be the goal. Guarantee that every Virginian, children, adults, and our undocumented have access to healthcare. Because no one should have to choose between putting food on the table and paying their medical bills. Right now we're working to increase Medicaid coverage to 200% of the federal poverty level. It's right now at 125%. We're also making our own Virginia-based exchange. I've voted to cap copays for insulin and inhalers, and capping copays doesn't control the problem of prescription drug costs because both caucuses on the Dem side are working with the federal delegation to resolve this. And I'm proud to be endorsed by the entire federal delegation up here in Northern Virginia. And I have strong relationships with all of them, and I plan on working on this issue with them at the federal level, where these issues about prescription drugs need and the vast majority of these issues in terms of what's covered at the federal level versus what's covered at the state level need to be addressed. In terms of the other kind of medicine and other kind of medical approaches, I'd have to do a lot more research on that. And I'd actually be interested in finding out whether or not there is a process or procedure at the state level for how we could actually include those kinds of healthcare approaches. But I have to do much more research.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. And our final question before we move on to closing statements. Someone here wants to talk about the digital divide. So the 49th district is ground zero for the digital divide in Arlington, which is one of the biggest crises of the pandemic. Will you publicly call for the county board to solve this issue by forming a public utility to start providing broadband and digital equity services to lower income neighborhoods? And we will begin with Delegate Lopez.
Sure. So the fact is that as of just a few years ago, 600,000 people in Virginia did not have access to internet or broadband. 600,000 people. What have we learned in the pandemic? That if you don't have access to internet and broadband, you can't go to school. You can't go to work in many cases. So I'm very proud of the fact that working with the governor's office, we've actually cut that number from 600,000 to around 325,000. There's much more that needs to be done because it's not just in the hollers of Southwest Virginia and Appalachia. It's not just Southside Virginia. It's not just parts of the Shenandoah. It's here in the 49th district. It's here in Fauquier. It's along the Route 1 corridor. And so what does that mean? That means that everything needs to be on the table. I'm incredibly interested in some of the work that's being done by the people at the statewide level and people at the local level in terms of the Arlington Fiber Initiative and the work that they're doing. I think it's innovative. I think it's very interesting because the problem is that these large telecom corporations, these large computer and internet corporations are not going the last mile. They're not investing in that last mile in these hard to reach places because it's not in their economic best interests. So we need to actually find innovative ways to take advantage of the fiber that's actually that's in the fiber infrastructure that's already there and allow localities to actually take advantage of that and do that actual idea of investing in and having localities be able to deliver that service. So, I'm not going to ask the county board to do anything. I wouldn't, at all consider myself, I would never sort of impose on them publicly. But I will say this is a very, very interesting idea. It's something that I would be supportive personally, and it's something that I actually supported during the last General Assembly session.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. And Ms. Karishma Mehta, same question for you. Will you publicly call for the county board to solve this issue by forming a public utility to start providing broadband and digital equity services to the 49th district?
I'll just answer the question directly. Yes, I do commit to publicly calling for the county board to solve that issue. I believe that public utilities should be owned by the community, not by large corporations like Comcast or Amazon. And I don't believe that, when politicians say that they are committed to expanding broadband as a human right, that they can successfully do that while also taking their campaign contributions from those same companies monopolizing broadband for our low-income communities. And so if we are talking about broadband as the human right, if we are talking about a digital divide that allows some people access to information and others to go in the dark by the wayside, then we are talking about a local issue. We are talking about the jurisdiction of a delegate to work with the county board to educate people on why it's important, why the local authorities should be doing this. And why it is important for not only the county board to be fighting for this and for their constituents, but for the state representative to be fighting alongside the county board and ensuring that all of our people can be guaranteed broadband. As a teacher in a pandemic, let me tell you, it is not, I have seen that inequity firsthand. My students, many of them have not been able to access the internet they need to connect with me, to connect with their family members. And not only does it lead to isolation, but it leads to education inequity. It leads to inequity in jobs and the availability of those jobs to people without broadband. The level of the disparities that occur when someone doesn't have access to broadband are felt throughout all sectors of our community. And so, yes, I think that it is one of the biggest crises. It has led to many untimely deaths in our community because people have not had access to information that they need to survive. And I would publicly call on the county board and work with them to ensure that we can create that kind of broadband service that is community owned and not by corporations like Comcast.
Thank you so much. And now we will move on to closing statements. So thank you both so much for being here today. And Ms. Karishma Mehta, you can go first for this one. You're muted. Oh, you're muted again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. All right, so I think I want to close with a personal story, one that I often don't tell because it's painful in many ways. I'm the oldest sibling of 3. I grew up always wanting to be a teacher. So when I was 16 years old, I joined a mentoring program that supported at-risk youth, kids at risk of dropping out from school, and also a program that helped wounded veterans returning home from war. I was blessed to mentor a young girl named Cheyenne. She was smart, kind, and sometimes sassy, and she came from impossible circumstances. She lived in a trailer park. Her mom struggled with drug addiction and lack of health care. And she often took care of her younger brother after school, the same way that I grew up taking care of mine. Right before her 18th birthday, she committed suicide. She was rushed to the ICU and declared brain dead after 12 hours on a respirator. And her family was not only crushed by her death, but the medical bills that followed. And shortly after she passed, about a year later, I found out that wounded veterans, 2 of them that I worked closely with during my time in high school, who suffered from extreme PTSD and lack of health care, had also taken their lives. We live in one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country on the history of this planet. And yet young people like Cheyenne and veterans who have risked their life for our country in war are pushed to the brink of suicide because our government refuses to guarantee our basic human rights of healthcare, housing, and a good education. Those are not big asks of our government. And it is unconscionable that people tout themselves as nuanced or progressive when we have working people struggling just to survive. We need someone who's walked a few miles in those shoes, who has survived suicide, who has survived starvation wages, working paycheck to paycheck and funding their own classroom and making sure their students are fed on a daily basis. I took this step to fight for people who have constantly been ignored and left behind in the 49th district. And I'm proud to be fighting for them because I have shared their pain and carried that pain for many years. So together in solidarity, I believe that we have an opportunity to transform Virginia into a place that fights and works for all of us, not just the wealthy and the powerful few. And my commitment to you and to this district will always be to center those closest to the pain of injustice. And I thank you all for being here today, for listening to my story, and I hope to earn your vote during early voting and on June 8th. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Delegate Alfonso Lopez.
Thank you, everyone. Just to respond to one thing that's been brought up a couple times right now, let me be very clear. The people who donate to my campaign are buying into my agenda, not the other way around. To see proof of that, just look at my record. 100% lifetime rating from the League of Conservation Voters, 100% lifetime rating from VEA, Virginia Education Association, and an A rating from NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia, and a Green New Deal champion. I've received the endorsement of all of the Northern Virginia organized labor groups who have endorsed in this campaign. In this last session alone, I got my entire legislative agenda every bill signed into law to close the Charleston loophole on gun sales, secure $800 million in funding for the Chesapeake Bay cleanup, secure in-state financial aid for Dreamer students who are too often left behind, create the first ever LGBTQ plus advisory board in the South, guarantee COVID-19 treatment, testing, and vaccinations for our undocumented populations and individuals who are unable to afford healthcare, strengthen oversight for localities on bad actor establishments, provide pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. That doesn't sound like a corporate-backed agenda. I want to thank everyone for coming this morning, and thank you to the Arlington Democrats for hosting. I promised 10 years ago that I'd be a tireless champion for our values and progressive policies in Richmond, and I've kept my promise. I pledged to help build a Democratic majority in Richmond so that we could actually accomplish our vision, our goals, our principles, our values, and now we've got to defend it. My parents used to say that there's nothing more important than working to lift up those who are poor and sick and oppressed and afraid. Keeping that bond with my mom and dad has paid me back 1,000-fold. Looking back, they were almost always right, especially about the fact that there's nothing in the world as rewarding as helping people. Meeting a dreamer who can now afford to go to college, meeting a family that has a roof over their head because of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, making sure a constituent family doesn't lose their heat in the winter, meeting a young mom winning the battle against cancer who has health insurance because we were able to expand Medicaid, making it easier for women and minority-owned small businesses to grow and thrive, and ensuring that the social safety net that was there for my parents is there for future generations as well. Going forward, we need to create more prosperity and do it in a way where everybody wins. We need to invest in our infrastructure and in our workforce, and most of all, in our children. To do that, we need a delegate with experience and a deep, nuanced understanding of public policy and the legislative process in Richmond. The issues before us are far too important to settle for anything less if we're going to keep Virginia moving forward. I will continue to be a champion for our values and priorities. I will continue fighting for the community I love. And with your support, we will continue to elect more Democrats in Richmond so that we have a government that truly reflects our shared principles. My name is Alfonso Lopez. I'm running for re-election to the House of Delegates to build a better future for my kids, my family, and for you and your families. I ask for your support and vote on Election Day. Together, let's continue building a Virginia that lifts everyone up and leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here today. As a reminder to everyone on the call with us, Election Day is Tuesday, June 8th, and early voting does begin April 23rd. I'd like to give a chance for both of our candidates or their teams to drop any links to their website or such that they would like to do in the chat. If you guys would like more information, to keep in touch with them. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here today. And this was a great morning session. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you,